Okay, thank you for tuning in again today. This is going to be part two um, of the first video. Wanted to address a couple things from the first video. And then in this video, I also want to go deep into the appointed times, and especially the appointed time of Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, and Pentecost. And how that, and then of course, the starting of the church age and the ending of the church age and the rapture and how it correlates to those appointed time, that actual appointed time, and the other appointed times. We've touched on a few things in the last video. Didn't want to make the two videos too long so that they're not too much over an hour, and hopefully under an hour. So we're going to kind of jump right in on this. There's a couple things I want to address from the first one. uh, and then first off, want to go in and address, when you have that 30.5 on there, and we always know we're knowing, so that lines up with the 30.5. That 0.5 is leveling out the year because the sin event actually happened on Passover, which is exactly 6 months into a new year. And that's why when you go, and we know if you go from 30 AD and you minus the 4,000 years to the day of the sin event, and then you minus that extra one for the 0 year, it brings you to 3971 AD, but it would be 3971 AD of Passover. So if you go back to 33 years on that, you'll see that you're at 4004 BC, but you also have to add the half a year on when you come up from this. So now when you go up to 33 point, oops, let's see, we had that, that's minus 4004 plus the 33.5, you'll see that's where it comes to the 3970.5. So you have that 0.5 in there because it's always Passover, and the 0.5 is completing out that year. And we went through that. And go back into the first video, you'll see that exactly from Feast of Tabernacles to Feast of Unleavened Bread is exactly 180 days or 6 months. So it's an exact breakdown, and that's where those two sin events, the sin event happening at Passover and unleavened bread, and leaven obviously is meaning sin, and that's and then if you go back 6 months, it's Tabernacles, where most likely Jesus was born and creation started. Right around and the fall feast, and then of course the spring feast is where the sin event happened. And then we've got that one feast right there in the middle that's just a 1 day feast, which is one of the three feasts that are mandatory for everyone to attend, which is Feast of Tabernacles in the fall, Feast of Passover in the spring, and then that one summer feast, which is referred to as Shavuot, or the Feast of Weeks, the counting of weeks, which is Pentecost. That is exactly where the church age started, and I believe the church age will end. And the rapture event that is coming up, the harpazo event, that we get our word rapturo from in the Greek. So that 3970.5 is using it so that you can show that the year of 30 AD lines up. What I want to get into is what that means is you can't use the year 3971 if you minus that half a year coming to the 4,000 years back from the cross, because Adam broke that year at Passover 6 months into it. So the actual Shemitah cycles and sabbatical cycles, it starts afresh for the counting of man in man's 6,000 year days, 6,000 years for man, and 7,000 years total plan for the 7 days and 6 days of God's plan. You would add one so that you're at Feast of Trumpets in 3970 AD. So therefore, if you add your 6,000 years for man, you're going to come to, and then your plus one for the 0 year, you're going to come to 2031. Okay, so 2031 would be the end of the 6,000 years. Why is that important? Because 2031 is the first year of the sabbatical cycle going into the millennium. Okay? Now, what I want to address on, and so if you then minus 2 days or 2,000 years, you'll see it brings you back to 31 AD. Okay? And that's why we had the 30.5 in there, because if you go back to Passover, that would be where the sin event happened. Okay? But now what I want to focus on is that fourth day. And in this, I want to show that Leviticus 25, I believe, is actually prophetic. I believe the Lord showed me that this is actually prophecy and prophetic, pointing to the actual second day, the actual second coming of Jesus, and the fulfillment of the 6,000 years and the 6 days of man. And that only one day lines up for that. And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. And that's kind of what I wanted to start this video off. I didn't want to put it into that last video. So, but I wanted to show that we know that 31 AD is actually 4,000 years if you start to count back from the clean years of giving it a full year starting from Feast of Trumpets. So when you go with the 30 AD and you minus the 4,000 years, that's why it brings you to 3971. And that would be actually exactly 4,000 years to the day that Jesus went to the cross at 33 and a half years old, and that Adam sinned at 33 and a half years old, forward 4,000 years from this date. So I don't want to get you confused on that, but you know that you clean this, you have that solid year start by going the point 1, which is starting your solid year of year count for man. Okay, so now what I want to show is also when you go into Leviticus, like we did, and let's go back over here to Leviticus 25, and it shows he goes over his sabbatic year and the year of the Jubilee. Now, where I believe is this is prophetic, and it's a prophecy pointing to that Jubilee year never has been used. They've never did it. But also, if you go into Leviticus 26 and read Leviticus 26 on where he shows that the punishment of years for Israel all is based off of the Sabbatic year, the Sabbath year. For not keeping the Sabbath years, he counted up his counts for the years that they would go into captivity and the different years of that off the Sabbath year. He never came at them about the Jubilee year, but all the Jubilee years that they didn't keep. Why? Is because I believe that Leviticus 25 here is showing to be a prophecy and prophetic to show that the year, there's only going to be one Jubilee that is ever going to be kept, and that Jubilee is going to be kept by Jesus Christ. And that means this, I believe, when you show and you read the Jubilee down here, let's see, the law of redemption, according to the number of years after the Jubilee, and then I think it's Leviticus 25:10. And ye shall hallow the 50th year, right? So let's actually start in 25:9. Then shalt cause the trumpet of the, okay, actually go back here. I want to start it right there, 25:8. So Leviticus 25:8. This, I believe, is prophetic and a prophecy. We're going to go over it, and I'll show you on the calculator what I mean by that. But this points to a particular exact day that this actually is going to happen. So thou shalt number 7 Sabbaths of years unto thee 7 times 7 years, and the space of the 7 Sabbaths of years shall be unto thee 49 years. 49 years. Then the very next year, then shall thou cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month, in the day of atonement. Ye shall make the trumpet sound throughout all your land, and ye shall hallow the 50th year. So the very next year, the first year of the next Sabbath cycle, like we went over in the first video, first recording, and the first, and also being that 50th year for the Jubilee. And ye shall hallow the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land unto all inhabitants thereof. It shall be a Jubilee unto you, and ye shall return every man unto his possession, and ye shall return every man unto his family. This, I believe, those right there is prophetic, and I'll show you how the numbers match or mark out and show out that this is prophetic, that this can only happen the way he wrote it in Leviticus 25 here, 25:8 through 10. That can only happen on one day of God's 7-day prophetic plan, his 7,000-year plan. And that one day points to his second coming and the year of his second coming. The year of his first coming and the day of his first coming was the year 4000 and day 4. His second coming points to the year 6000, okay, and the sixth day, which is the sixth day for man. Now remember, when we go back here to Genesis now, I believe it's Genesis 6. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. Okay, so when you go back here, if we go from 3970, okay, starting the year count, you go up your 6,000 years, brings you to 2031 AD. At the Feast of Trumpets, or in this case, which we just read in Leviticus, 10 days into the month, 2031 will start on Day of Atonement of 2031. 10 days in, instead of starting it at the Feast of Trumpets, that's where you're going to blow the trumpet and sound the Jubilee. That will be the very first Jubilee that will be kept by Jesus Christ. It's actually prophetic that there's only one and done Jubilee. There's only one Jubilee, and there's only one person that keeps it, and that's Jesus Christ. No other Jubilees have been kept throughout the years, and no other days and years line up for the Jubilee to work like he said they will work in Leviticus 25. So 2031 will begin the millennium and the Jubilee year that Christ will bring into effect. So, and we read in Genesis there that 120 years is 6,000, or 120 Jubilees is actually 6,000 years. So 2031 is the start. 2030 would be the very end of the tribulation in that 7th year for the tribulation. So if you minus 1 from that, or actually let's just plus it. If you minus 7 years from there, then the next cycle starts here. That's coming up on the Feast of Trumpets of 2024, because we're still in 2023 up to the Feast of Trumpets. 2024 will start that new sabbatical cycle. So 2024 would be year 1, then you plus 1. 2025 is going to be year 2, then you plus 1. 2026 is going to be year 3, then you plus 1. 2027 is going to be year 4, then you plus 1. 2028 is going to be year 5, and then you plus 1. And then 2029 is going to be year 6, then you plus 1. And then 2030 is going to be year 7, and again, that divides by your 7 for your Sabbath year. 2030 will be your year 7 of the 7-year tribulation, and that 7-year tribulation will end at one day before. Remember, because he prophetically wrote that one time that you do a Jubilee, you don't start on Feast of Trumpets, you start on Day of Atonement, 10 days in. So one day before that 10th day of Day of Atonement, okay, 2030 will then end, and 2031 will start your new cycle, and it'll be a Jubilee, and it'll be the first year of a new 7-year count of the new sabbatical cycle. If you minus your 6,000 years from that, minus the 1 for the 0 year, you get you to 3970 AD, where the counting of man started. Okay? And we know that if you take 6,000 years, you divide that by 50, you get 120 Jubilees, which brings you back to Genesis, where it says, my spirit will only be with man for 120 years. Then Jesus is going to come back, like we went over in that last video, on his second coming. The millennium will start, and there'll be a 1,000-year reign with Jesus in the millennium. Okay? So that's important as we look at what I want to get into now and show you how prophetically I believe it points to the 6th day. Okay? So if we start at 30 AD and you minus the 4,000 years, you minus the 1, it brings you back to the sin event of Passover of 3971 AD, where Adam was 33 and a half years old at Passover. Okay? 3971 AD. Now, we know that 4,000 years, when you start the count from 3970, right, is going to bring you to 31 AD. So what I want to go over now is I want to show you, I want to focus in on, if you have a piece of paper and you write out the 7 days. Day 1 is 1,000, day 2 is 2,000, 3 is 3,000, and so forth, up to day 7, which is 7,000. What I want to show you is how the sabbatical cycles only prophetically line up to day 6. And now what do I mean by that? If you go to 1,000, that's your first day. That, of course, is going to divide for the Jubilee, okay? And that would have been the 20th Jubilee that God gave man. Remember, he's going to go to 120 Jubilees. So that would be the 20th Jubilee. But if you times that by 7, you get back to your, you go back to your 1,000 as your day 1, okay? In Leviticus, it says count 49, and then the next is your 50. So that would mean that 999 should divide by 7 and be your Sabbath year. But does it? No. Okay, so that doesn't work. So does 998, does that divide by 7? No. Okay, so that doesn't work. So we're 2 off now. 998, does 997 divide by 7? No, that doesn't work. So does 996 divide by 7? That doesn't work. So does 995 divide by 7? That doesn't work. Does 994 divide by 7? There's your Sabbath year. So 994 is your Sabbath year, but 1,000 is your Jubilee year. So it's off 6 years in the first year. Okay? So if you add 6 plus that first day, because you're on the first day, so 6 plus 1, that equates to 7. See how it lands up to 7? 6 days off plus the first day is 7. If you go to the second day of 2,000, we know that is going to be even for the Jubilee. It's now going to be the 40th Jubilee that God gave in the year 2000. So for it to line up for Leviticus 25, it has to be 1 year off from the Sabbath year, and then the very next year being your 50th. So if your 50th is 2000, your next year you would think would be 1999. And that would divide by 7? No. Okay. So will 1998 divide by 7? No. Okay. Will 1997 divide by 7? No. Okay. So will 1996 divide by 7? No. So will 1995 divide by 7? Yes. There's your 285th Sabbath year from the counting of man. Remember in 3970 AD, 285. But that is 2000 minus, what was it? We figured it was 1995, right? Divided by 7. Yep. So in year 2, 1995, that's 5 days off. So 5 plus 2 equals 7. You follow me? If we go to the next day, 3000, we know that's going to divide by 50. That's going to be God's 60th Jubilee. On day 3 was God's 60th Jubilee he gave man. Okay? But that's not going, again, to divide by the Sabbath year. So for it to line up with Leviticus 25, the way he tells them to be 49 years, and then your very next year is going to be your Sabbath, is going to be your Jubilee year, and the first year again of the sabbatical cycle, that should be 2999. Does that divide by 7? No. So would 2998 divide by 7? No. So does 2997 divide by 7? No. So does 2996 divide by 7? There's your 428th Sabbath year from the counting of man, or the counting of God's 7,000-year plan, right? 428. You times that by 7, that brings you back to 2996. That means day 3 is at 3000, but the Sabbath year is at 2996. It's off 4. So on 4 plus 3 again equals your Sabbath, 7, right? 4 plus 3 equals 7. So day 3 is off 4 days. Now let's go to day 4. Day 4 is going to divide by 50. There's your Sabbath. There's God's 80th Jubilee for man. Remember, he gives him 120. Now he's in the 80th. And that brings you to day 4 when Jesus came. Okay, and died on the cross for our sins here. On day 4, we know that divides by 50. Where is day 4? That would mean for it to work for Leviticus 25, 3999 should divide by 7, right, and be your Sabbath year. It doesn't. What do you want to bet? It's off what? 3 days? Or 3 years? I don't know. Let's see. 3998 divided by 7. Nope. 3997 divided by 7. There you go. There's your 571st Sabbath year since the counting of God's plan. Okay? 3997 is off 3 years from the Jubilee. So day 4 doesn't line up like Leviticus says. So now, remember, because it should be 1 day off or 1 year off, and then the next year is going to be your Jubilee year. That's how Leviticus 25 tells you to count it and show it for that to be a Jubilee year. So day 4 doesn't work. How about day 5? We know that's day 5. That is God's 100th Jubilee with man. Okay? On day 5. So that would mean that 4999 divides by 7. Is it work? Nope. So let's see. 4998 divided by 7. There you go. The 714th Sabbath year from the counting of God's time of 7 days and 7,000 years and 6 days and 6,000 years for man. That was the 714th Jubilee. I'm sorry, Sabbath year. And it's off 2 years from the cycle. So if that's the 5th day, 5 plus 2 equals 7, and there's your Sabbath. So the 5th day is off 2. Now let's look at the 6th day. The 6,000 divides by 50. There is, right there, Genesis 1:20, right? You go back to Genesis 1:20. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years. Okay? There's day 6, which is year 6,000, and it's the only one, right? Times 50, there's your 6,000 years in 6 days. That would mean that 5999 should divide by 7 and be the Sabbath year, which is your 857th Sabbath year, which is going to be this last year of the tribulation and the last year of the count of this up to the 6,000 years for man, which equates to the 120 days. That is 857. That means it's exactly the way 5999 is your Sabbath year, is your 49th year, if you were counting it the way he says in Leviticus, the same way that you count Shavuot and the Feast of Weeks. 7 Sabbaths gets you to the 49. The day after, the morrow after, is you number it the 50th, and that's Pentecost. That's your Feast of Weeks, okay? That lines up only for day 6, okay? That was why I believe that Leviticus 25 is actually a prophecy pointing to the 6th day and Jesus' second coming. Now, if you go to the 7th day, watch this. 7,000 is your 7 days. That will be after the millennium reign of Christ for his 1,000 years that we will be here with him. If you are in the first resurrection, the rapture and resurrection, the first resurrection, then you will be there in that 1,000-year reign period up to the 7th day of 7,000. That divides by 50, and that would be 140 jubilees that God gave. Remember, he gave man 120. Then Jesus is going to reign for his 1,000 years. That would be 140. That would be the 7th day in the 7,000 years. Now watch this. That also divides. It's perfect. The counts catch up. So day 1 is off 6 years or 6 days. 6 plus 1 is 7. Day 2 is off 5 days. 5 plus 2 is 7. Day 3 is off 4 days. 4 plus 3 is 7. Day 4 is off 3 days. 3 plus right, and so on. So I lost my count as I'm thinking it, but you would be on day 4 plus 3, it's off 3 days. 4 plus 3 is 7. Day 5 is off 2 days. 5 plus 2 is 7. The only one that lines up is day 6, which is off 1 day, and 1 plus 6 equals 7, and that's the only Jubilee that's going to be kept. It's going to be kept by Jesus Christ. In the millennium, there will be no more use for a Jubilee, because the Jubilee will come true, just like we read now in Leviticus. When you go back to Leviticus 25, this right here, (25) 8, 9, and 10, and if you read 10, and ye shall hallow the 50th year, the millennium, and proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto the inhabitants thereof. It shall be a jubilee unto you, and ye shall return every man, everybody unto his possession, which is what? What Adam lost when he sinned. It will now be returned. If you're all the bride of Christ and you're in that first resurrection. The second resurrection will not happen until after this 1 day goes by in the 1,000 years. Then everybody will be resurrected who's in that second resurrection to stand at the great white throne judgment before God, and stand before God without Jesus Christ's gift of him dying for your sins and covering your sins. Okay? And you will stand in front of God. But it shall be a jubilee unto you, and you shall return every man unto his possession, and ye shall return every man unto his family. This is God. Jesus has reigned for 1,000 years. That's the only jubilee that's going to be kept. It's the only one that ever has been kept. He never punished Israel for not keeping the jubilee. He punished them for not keeping the Sabbath years. And so I believe that this right here is prophetically pointing to what we just went over. And it prophetically points to the second coming and the millennium, which is day 6, which is 6,000 years divided by 50, which is your 120 that God says in Genesis, I will only give man 120 years, okay, which is 120 jubilees. I believe that's prophetically pointing to day 6. That's the only one that lines up to Leviticus. And he would not hold them up to punishment for that if they were not able to keep it on day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, but only on day 6. That was a prophecy, I believe, of God showing us that his numbers point to Jesus' second coming in the 6th day, which is year 6,000, which is the 120th Jubilee, which is 1 year off 5,999 divided by 7 is 1 year off. That's your Sabbath year. It's the only one that day that would be 1 year off for it to be your 857th Sabbath, which is that last year, that last Sabbath year of the tribulation that is going to start in 2024. Now, we know that day 4 is off by 3 days, right? Or 3 years. So if we go to 30 AD again, minus the 4,000 to get us back to the exact day of the sin event, minus the 1 brings us to 3971. Plus your 1 to round that up to your 3970, and let's go to day 4. So if you go to day 4 plus 4,000, you end up plus 1 for your 0 year. And remember, this is always, whenever you cross AD, BC to AD, AD to BC, you got to add or minus in that extra year so that your count is correct, because there's no 0 year. So 31 AD at the Feast of Trumpets, right? For God's count for man and for his 7-year plan for creation of 7,000 years, man he gave 6,000 years or 6 days. 31 at the Feast of Trumpets, right? When did we, does that divide by 7? No, that's off. So that's got to be what year? But we already figured this out, because we know that 30 AD is when Jesus was on the cross, and that was Passover of 30 AD. Passover of 30 AD was still, if you went back to 29 AD at Feast of Trumpets, that started the year. In the year on the Gregorian calendar switched to 30 AD. Now it's Passover, and Jesus Christ went to the cross to die for our sins and rise again the 3rd day, and is about to come in any day now. And then 7 years from that will be his second coming. 29 AD was that sabbatical cycle. Remember? 29 AD was the first year of the sabbatical cycle, because we figured out that 28 was the Sabbath year. You add your 1 to that, brings you to 29 AD. So 29 AD was your first year, you plus 1. 30 AD was your second year, you plus 1. 31 AD was your 3rd year. What did we figure out? Day 4,000 was off. Divide by 50. It was the 80th Jubilee times 50. But the Sabbath year in day 4 should be off 3. which we just figured off. It was off 3 there, right? So if you go off 3 from there, it should be 3997 divided by 7. It was your 571st Sabbath year, and it was off 3. Just like when you go back to the cross 30 AD, which is still 29 AD. So 29 AD, remember 29 of Passover is 29 AD. 30 AD of 29 AD of Feast of Trumpets is the first year of that Sabbath cycle. That's when he met with Moses and Elijah at the Mount Configuration, and it was at the time of the Feast of Trumpets, and he was telling them about, because they were coming thinking that they were going to do Daniel's 70th week there, but then he told them about what was going to happen at the cross and his death, and then that was where the comma came in and the church age started, and you had that 2,000 years to go forward from. But remember, the 2,000 years goes forward from 31 AD, your 2 days, which gets you to 2130 or 2031, which is the start. And that's the only one that lines up again, because 2031 is going to be off what? Is 2031 divided by 7? No. So where's your Sabbath year here? Minus 1. 2030, that divided by 7? Yep, there's your 290th Sabbath year from God's count, 6 months after creation, 6 months after the sin event, starting at Feast of Trumpets to count up to your 290th Sabbath year, which is 2030, which we already figured out is the 7th year of that tribulation that starts in 2024, okay? That means that the very next year would be your start of the millennium and your prophetic completion of keeping the Jubilee year that was prophesied in Leviticus 25. So that's what I wanted to get over. I didn't want to put that into the other video or the other discussion we had on the last recording to kind of show you that, because I believe that God has shown that Leviticus 25 is actually a prophecy, and there's only one day that will happen on, and that's the day that Jesus Christ will come back on his second coming and start his 1,000-year, one-day reign for year 7, for day 7 of 1,000 years, which will complete the 7,000-year plan. And he gave man his 120 jubilees, which is his 6,000. And that's the only one that lines up is day 6, which is about to happen within days now. Within days now is about to happen. The last 7 years of this is about to happen. So I think that's really important. I kind of wanted to beat that really into because now you have a calculator, you can mess with it all you want. You could write it down on a piece of paper. It's very easy. You just keep going back to Leviticus 25 on that. And of course, in Genesis, he says how many years he's going to give. And in the last recording, I went over more, going over a quick overview of the 7,000-year plan and the 7-day plan. So really right now, I want to go from this, and I want to go into, and I want to focus on how I feel it's being shown that it is pointing towards Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, which is Pentecost, okay? And that being the rapture.